We're so glad to be back in this beautiful National Medal of Honor Museum. My name is Brittany Martinez, and I'm the executive director of Principles First. So it's so great to be here with all of you tonight. And thank you so much for joining us for this intimate gathering. And, Principles First is a really unique community. I come from Republican politics myself, worked at the RNC, worked for speakers, for other offices on the Hill, all Republican, and I found myself sort of at a crossroads a few years ago, that I saw the writing on the wall. I saw sort of the trajectory of where the party was going, and I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm a comms person. I said, I'm not going to go on the record to defend what's happening because I think what's happening is abhorrent. And I found a home at Principles First. And it's great because I still consider myself a Republican, but we have folks who are disgruntled former Republicans, and that's great. We have folks who have kind of always been independent, and that's awesome too. We have some folks who are Democrats who maybe they're a little disgruntled with things that are happening over there as well. And what I think brings us all together in rooms like this is that we're just common sense Americans who are fed up with partisan politics, who know that there's a better path forward, that we don't need to get caught up in bombastic rhetoric and the name calling, that we need to, sure, work together. I think collaboration and working together is a good thing, but bipartisanship all of a sudden has become a bad word, right? Working together and getting things done for the American people, that's bad. But it's not. We need to be able to use our voices and be the adults in the room and do things that move our country forward. So anyway, thank you guys all so much for being here today. I know that we have some wonderful speakers, so I won't take too much time up here other than to say, if you like what you heard tonight and this is sort of your first touch point with us, or maybe one of your first touch points with us, there's a few ways to get involved. And I meant to bring it up with me, but if you see there's a QR code on your table, so if you scan that, that will take you to our website. You can join. Yes, thank you. And that's Bob, one of our state leads for Texas. And before I say anything else, actually, we can't do any of these things without the help of our volunteers. So if you could please give Bob and our volunteers a quick round of applause because they're so wonderful. And if you scan that QR code, it'll give you different ways to get involved. You can also just follow us on social media. We have events happening all the time. We're starting to do more virtual things. We're starting to do beyond the dinners. We've done a lot of the dinners, kind of, if you're Republican or familiar with Republican politics, the Lincoln Day dinners, right? So this is sort of what our version has been. But we're looking to do a lot different things moving forward and training. This year, we're encouraging all of our volunteers to be election officials, because we need to make sure that we have confidence in our election system and that people don't go to the polls and are scared to vote. So if you like, again, what you hear tonight and you want to get more involved, please feel free to scan that QR code, talk to me, talk to Bob, just send us a DM on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it these days. And thank you so much again for being here. And I think now's probably my time to stop talking and invite Bob back up here to move forward with the programming. Thank you all. Bye. Thank you.
Hmm. Okay. And again, thank you all for coming. This was just to see just many people in the room who care about our country, who care about the direction, who believe, hopefully, in that we can still make something good out of this country and straighten our path out. I would argue the path needs to be straightened out. You may not. But if you're here, you probably think the path's wrong. So it's really good all of you show, and I appreciate it. The plan for the evening's pretty simple. Michael Wood here is going to give a quick keynote. Michael ran for Congress in 2021. That's where I sort of ran into him one day. and pretty passionate guy. Been to Afghanistan, was in Afghanistan two tours. Was wounded both times. Came back to this country, has married to another. Michael's from Midland, Texas, by the way. You've probably heard of it. It's called oil and sagebrush, I think, right? It's tumbleweeds. And he went to NYU, the university, which says something because that's a hard place to get into. What'd you study? Economics. Well, there you go. Michael came back from the last, at some point, and 2021, we had a runoff election here. Our congressperson died here in Arlington, or in this district. And I heard and one day I read Adam Kinzinger, who you probably all know, said, well, I'm endorsing this guy. Turns out you and Adam had never met at that point, right? I said, I called Michael, and we talked for about an hour while I walked my dog in the park one day. And I said, I want to work for this guy. There was 23 candidates in that race. Most of them trying to be out Trump. They would come to my door and knock on my door in their boots and their jeans. Of course, Trump doesn't wear boots and jeans, but I'm the real Donald Trump, or Donald Trump be alike. I helped Michael what little I could. He didn't have much name recognition, and he sure didn't have any money. And it's like one of those Kentucky Derbies, when they bring the extra starting gate up because they got so many horses. It was crazy. He finished 9th, which I thought, considering there was no money, no name recognition, no party, we made some connections, or you made some connections. And I'm waiting for him to figure out what he's going to do next, because he led Marines into combat in some pretty ugly circumstances, I suspect, in a place that they probably didn't want to be, called Afghanistan. So I have a lot of respect for that. I have a lot of respect for the man, what little I've gotten to know him. And oh, by the way, I raised 2 daughters. He has 4. He's probably going to get a medal for that someday. Michael, come on and do what you do.
Very much. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. I'm just going to move up here so I can look at my notes while I speak. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Let me just pull up what I'm going to say here. Yeah, so it's great to be here. I've been involved with Principles First. It's a great organization since my run for the founder of Principles First, Heath Mayo, great guy, a Texan, came out and went door to door for me. Again, when I had no money, no name recognition, anything like that. So because he did that, I'll do whatever he wants me to do for the rest of my life. It was a very, very nice thing to go door to door for an anti-Trump Republican in Texas. And so he did that, so I'll do whatever he wants me to do, and Bob as well. It's truly an honor to be here in a place like this where history is not abstract, it's preserved and it's remembered, and it reminds us of the generations of Americans who wore the uniform not for themselves but for something larger. Recently, Vice President Vance said that soldiers don't fight for ideals or abstractions. And I want to start there because I think that claim gets something fundamentally wrong. It's true that most soldiers and Marines and sailors and airmen, they don't speak in the language of political theory. They're not walking around quoting the federal papers. But I think they understand deeply and instinctively that they're serving something different from what exists in most of the world. They know that they serve a free country, a country where power is limited or supposed to be limited, a country governed by laws and not by the whims of one man, and a country where the military answers to civilians and civilians answer to the people. Even if they can't fully articulate that, they understood what they were defending wasn't just a territory, but a system, a way of life. And that understanding is what has always made the American military distinct. There are deeper issues here about whether or not we are a nation of blood and soil, as the vice president seems to think, or a nation of ideas, as Lincoln thought. Now, to be clear, there are serious challenges facing the U.S. military that predate Donald Trump. Issues of procurement and readiness and recruitment and the erosion of our defense industrial base. The growing strategic challenge posed by China, especially in the Pacific. These are real, urgent, and structural problems. But today, I want to focus on something more immediate, and I think all the panelists will as well. Because unless we address it, we're not going to be able to solve all those other problems. And worse, we may lose the ability or even the desire to even try. One of the defining features of the Trump era is that it forces us to relitigate basic principles that we once took for granted. And that is true for all sorts of issues of public policy, but especially for issues of military and foreign policy. So instead of debating how to prepare for future conflicts, instead of investing in shipbuilding and munitions production and advanced technologies, instead of asking how we're going to deter a peer competitor like China, we're pulled into fundamental arguments about who we are, about whether war should be authorized by Congress, about whether military leaders are expected to uphold the Constitution or demonstrate personal loyalty, about whether the armed forces are a national institution or a political one. And, I have to say, as an aside, whether or not we should go to war with and kill Danes, our NATO ally, who sent her sons to fight alongside us in Afghanistan. So, when you're constantly fighting over principles, you're not making progress on anything else. And this isn't just a distraction, it's a strategic liability. Because whenever we argue among ourselves, the world doesn't stand still. So, the danger isn't simply about policy, it's about institutional corrosion. We've already seen what happens when Trump-style leadership takes hold in a major American institution. The Republican Party was not simply changed, it was reshaped around loyalty, grievance, and personal allegiance to one man. The concern is that the same dynamic could take root in the military. Because one consistent pattern is this: Trump doesn't just influence institutions, he transforms them into his image. So, 3 things I want to talk about. The first is the reckless use of military force. It has to be said right up front, and I can't believe that this is happening, but we're fighting a major war right now that Congress has had zero input in. This is insane. Mothers and fathers whose children are going to fight in this war should have a voice through their elected representatives. Taxpayers who are ultimately going to pay for this war and its aftermath should have a voice in this through their elected representatives. The founders understood that the biggest threat to liberty was a man on a horse with the guns. In our constitutional system, war is not supposed to be easy to get into. It's not supposed to be fast. It's not supposed to be driven by impulse, even though, of course, there are times when you need energy in the executive, such as whenever we're invaded or whenever one of our allies are attacked. The decision to use force was deliberately divided between the executive and the legislative branches because the founders understood the stakes. War is the most serious action the nation can take. It requires deliberation, accountability, and legitimacy. And yet we've seen a willingness to sidestep that process and to treat military action as something that can be initiated without any meaningful congressional involvement. This is not just a legal issue, it's a cultural one, and it sends a message that war can be used as a tool, sometimes for political positioning, sometimes for displays of strength, sometimes even to improve an individual's image, which is a dangerous shift. Because once war becomes casual, it becomes easier to misuse. So that was the first issue. The second one is this sort of distortion of lethality. You'll often hear the phrase lethality used as sort of like the defining goal of the military. And Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth wrote a book about this, and this seems to be the only thing that he cares about. And yes, of course, we want a lethal military. That's our purpose. It exists to win wars or to deter wars from happening in the first place. But the American military has never been defined by lethality alone. It's been defined by disciplined lethality, lawful lethality, accountable lethality. Violence carried out under the rule of law, guided by civilian authority, and constrained by values. And that distinction matters. When lethality becomes a slogan detached from those principles, it risks becoming something else, something much darker. As you know, now I'm a Marine, and Marines say kill constantly in the infantry. It's just a cultural thing. It's part of the culture. You want that sort of intensity in the military and the Marines. But even within that culture, there's always been an understanding of limits, of discipline, of honor. This is the difference between a professional military and something else entirely. If that ethos erodes, if we begin to tolerate or even celebrate excess brutality or a disregard for the rules of disregard for the laws of war, we're no longer talking about strength. We're talking about decay. Third, the politicization of the officer corps is an incredibly serious danger. People think about people in the military in general, but especially senior officers, as if they're some sort of superman. And obviously, anyone who puts on the uniform deserves our respect and admiration. But military officers aren't immune from incentives, and they're not above ambitions. They operate within a system that rewards and punishes certain behaviors, and over time, that system shapes the institution. So if the expectation becomes loyalty to an individual rather than fidelity to the Constitution, that will have serious consequences. Promotion decisions will reflect it, advice given to the civilian leadership will reflect it, and the culture of the officer corps will reflect it. And we've already seen warning signs of this. That weird, pointless, very expensive sort of general meeting that happened last year was strange on a whole lot of levels, but it did sort of seem as if the senior guys who control the guns were being sort of asked to be political props for the president and maybe even have loyalty first and foremost to the president. Now, everybody in that room was stone cold professional as far as I could tell. But again, over time, that can change. Over time, incentives do what incentives do. And again, if you just look at the Republican Party, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, there was still a significant faction within the Senate, for instance, that wasn't just absolutely blindly loyal to everything that Donald Trump wanted to do. People like Ben Sass, people like Senator Corker, over time, they got weeded out. Either they lost primaries or they knew they were going to lose primaries, so they got out. If that same thing happens to people who have stars on their collars, things can get very dark very fast. For instance, again, last year, I think President Trump had meetings with, I think, every 3-star who was up for a 4-star, just one-on-one meetings. And I can almost guarantee you that the word Constitution wasn't used in any of those meetings. I think he wanted to say, whenever push comes to shove, will you pull the trigger and tell the guys to pull the trigger, potentially on protesters. Over time, you don't get the best officers in the systems, you get the most compliant ones. And once that process takes hold, the military risks being seen not as a national institution, but as a partisan one. Pretty much every institution in the country, Congress, the judiciary, certainly both political parties, colleges, churches, every institution over the past few decades has seen their reputation collapse. The only one that's really bucked that trend so far has been the military. It's going to be a very bad thing if the military is seen as some sort of Republican Guard for a political movement rather than a force that serves the entire country. So what's at stake here isn't just strategy or budgets or doctrine, it's the character of the United States military. Whether or not it remains an institution grounded in law accountable to the people, and loyal to the Constitution above all else, or whether it becomes something shaped by personal loyalty, political pressure, and institutional erosion. Once that happens, it's extraordinarily difficult to reverse. The military is not perfect. It never has been. But it's always tried to consistently live up to a standard of professionalism, of discipline, of restraint, of something of service larger to something greater than any one person. That's what we're defending. If we lose that, if we allow that standard to erode, then we're going to lose something far more important than readiness or capability. We're going to lose what makes the United States military not just powerful, but legitimate, respected, and fundamentally American. That's all I had to say. Now, Bob, I asked Bob, like, what do you want? How are you expecting this? And he said, fire and brimstone. I said, all right, well, I'm Catholic. We don't really do fire and brimstone, but I hope that this sort of at least gets the ball rolling on some of the things that the panels are going to talk about tonight. Are we just going to go straight into the panels now, Bob, or? Okay. I don't have any information up here. Yeah, we can do a Q&A. Okay. Am I running for office at the moment? Well, you need a political party to do that, and I think they all hate me, and I can't hate all them, so who knows? Yeah. Really? Okay, I'll look into the libertarians. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, yep. That was tragic. It was, I'm of two minds. I did 2 deployments to Afghanistan, and the first one in 2010, I really thought that we were sort of turning a corner. I never really bought into that it was going to turn into some sort of liberal democracy. But I thought that we were going to sort of turn a corner and get something somewhat stable, similar to what happened in Iraq whenever they did their surge. On the second deployment, it was just clear that this was going sideways, and I really started asking myself, like, why? How many more people are going to die on this? Because it seems like everybody involved, us, the bad guys, the civilian leadership, understands that this is going to go sideways. But it seemed like nobody was really willing to call a spade and leave. It was so sad. It was so sad. All the people who died, and the Afghan National Army just collapsed within, I think, literally 24 hours. So I think the decision to get out was correct. It was handled pretty horribly. And I absolutely understand why the American people are asking, spend all this blood, all this treasure, and they collapsed that quickly. How could that happen? And it was just an absolute mess. It was just sad across the board. Does that answer your question? Yeah. I think it was part of that, and I don't think really anybody was held accountable for it afterwards. Certainly nobody with anything shiny on their collar. I think everybody was just blown away whenever, looking back, what was this, July of 2021? I think August of 2021, everybody sort of expected that we would have about 7 days or 10 days to get everything sort of organized and then get out. And then it just looked like this Taliban blitzkrieg. They were just taking, position after position and province after province. And then it looked like we had about 3 days to get everybody out of there. I don't think it was necessary. I wouldn't say it was necessarily military leadership giving bad advice. I think it was just military leadership for 2 decades not being honest with themselves about how weak the Afghan National Army was. Which, I mean, people had their entire careers getting promoted, and not enough people raised their hands and said, this isn't working out. A lot of people said, we abandoned the ANA, and we didn't give them an air force They didn't have our logistics capability to help us to help them out. The Taliban didn't have an air force either, and they were able, again, to do this blitzkrieg. So I'm not really sure where all that money and blood went.
Hey, got it. I'm back. Hi.
Yes. So looking back on how this happened, it was such a weird time because it did seem like I think Donald Trump in his first term, yeah, basically made the decision. But then it seemed like he wanted to get through the election before the trigger was actually pulled on that. It was really strange because I remember him saying, well, he was going to bring the Taliban to Camp David. I mean, he says a lot of things, but he did say that, which I'm not saying of course, we had to talk to them. Most wars end with talking, but that seems like a bridge too far. Uh, I think part of this was also, I mean, I can beat up on generals all day. Uh, there's a chance that President Biden had sort of a chip on his shoulder for losing an argument within the Obama administration because he was against the Afghan war all the way back in 2009, 2010 when they were debating it. I think he sort of had a chip on his shoulder about that, and maybe that led him to put some pressure on generals to sort of get out of there in a more hasty manner than was wise. Yeah. Like in the 2 or 3 months leading up to this, what could have been done differently? Well, I mean, I'm just a humble company grade officer. But I would think that maybe a short-term surge in order to sort of build up those positions that got overrun so quickly. Uh, honestly, no, I don't think so. Again, like there is no pit. Yeah, I mean, I think ideally there would have been a longer negotiated process, maybe using back channels, maybe through Pakistan or something, that said the Taliban is going to be in the government. They're not going to control the government, and maybe that could have stopped the sort of the dominoes from falling. Listen, there's plenty to criticize. Look, I've been punching right the whole time I've been up here. I have plenty to criticize the Democratic Party on. I've got plenty to criticize Joe Biden on. As far as Afghanistan goes, this is 2 decades of failed policy through President Bush, President Obama, uh, President Trump, and then President Biden. It was just a misguided war from the beginning, and I think it's unfair to just put it specifically on President Biden. As much as, I mean, it'd be great if it was just his fault. But any other questions? Okay, I can talk sidebar if anybody wants to talk as well. Yeah, thank you very much.
There are a few of you in this room who are as mature as I am. Michael's not. I thought getting out of Afghanistan worked out about like I thought it was going to work out. If any of you remember Vietnam and the Vietnamese army collapsing, the Vietnamese government collapsing, and people clinging to the whatever they call them on the bottom of the helicopters, trying to get out to Navy ships. We didn't have a jungle in Afghanistan, but that was about the only difference I saw. Ugly. But I go back to the Vietnam and I'm going, boy, this looks familiar. Okay, Michael, thank you. So we're going to do a little panel discussion here. I have three veterans who are going to come up here, and I'm going to talk to them and ask them some questions. This is not scripted. I hope it's fun. I hope it's interesting. I know a couple of them, well, one of them real well, and I've got the other two I've talked to for several hours by phone recently, and they were fascinating discussions. I enjoyed them immensely. And we may call on Michael now and then too. We'll just kind of see how it goes. This is not real scripted. I've got some questions, but what I expect is that you'll get some interesting answers, and you may want to chime in and jump up, down, ask a question, and I hope you do. So my panel is a fellow named, well, Michael's already done it, Dexter Henson. This young man, I ran into once or twice back in my day when I was a Star Telegram reporter, and he was at Lockheed Martin trying to protect Lockheed Martin from me. He failed miserably. And then he came to work. I was working at Airbus the last part of my career over in Grand Prairie. One day he shows up at my door and says, "Oh, your boss hired me last night over the weekend or something." And we had a great 2 years. It was a lot of fun. We were communications guys. We would try to communicate to our bosses that if you want to win a contract, maybe you ought to go to work now, start communicating, maybe do a little advertising, get some good pictures. Don't they listen to us? But we had a good time.
Great time.
I had a great time. Scott Spreier. Oh, somebody knows he.
I have that clappy permit.
Scott was born and raised in some little town called Jetmore, Kansas, right?
Correct.
Which I think is somewhere near Dodge City.
It is.
And I have not spent any time in Dodge City or Jetmore, but I did spend 11 years of my life in Kansas. And there's a lot of nothing out there.
There is.
Wheat fields and more wheat fields, and occasionally a milo field or a cornfield. Scott tells me that where he grew up, most of the men were World War II veterans.
That's correct.
It was a white, Christian, patriotic town. So Vietnam was, okay, we were doing the right thing. We were going to kill the commies for Christ.
I heard that more than once. We needed to kill the commies for Christ.
That's interesting for Christians. But I'm a little bit younger than Scott, but I kind of probably heard some of those same things growing up. Scott was saw the draft lurking on the horizon. He was in college. Fort Hays?
Fort Hays State.
Fort Hays State. Great little place, by the way. And told me his grades didn't look real sharp, and the draft board reclassified him.
Yeah, I had gone to college. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I found girls and beer. And the draft board, I was A1.
Yeah. So the draft board classified him, and he said he was going to be a lousy foot soldier, but he would join the Air Force. He wanted to be a photojournalist, learned to do photography, volunteered to go to Vietnam.
I really don't thought about going to Vietnam, just taking off with my camera gear and going, because I found it a very interesting, what was going on. And I had thought about going ahead and joining the military. I wanted to be a helicopter pilot.
Those guys had a short lifespan of Vietnam.
I know.
Scott spent 3 years in the Air Force. He was assigned to intelligence. He worked at the NSA for 2 years, my notes said.
2 years at the NSA.
National Security Agency. So he saw a lot of the posts and the dirty and whatever, and forms of opinions, which we'll discuss. And the third person here is Early Davis. And Early is a Fort Worth young man. His father was Air Force. He went to a place called Texas A&M, was in the cadet corps, or corps of cadets. He was bound for the military, probably from birth. Absolutely. Went, got through Texas A&M, came out, graduated, went straight into the Army, and spent 3 years active duty, including a year in Vietnam, running convoys of supplies back and forth to bases and outposts. And then he spent 27 years in the Army Reserve. And what I gathered talking to him, he was in a lot of things that were some pretty interesting. He was training troops getting ready to go to Iraq. He volunteered to go to Iraq for the first Iraq War. They wouldn't take him. I guess he was too valuable training troops here at home. But anyway, 3 men, all U.S. Army, all veterans.
Wow.
Oh, that's Air Force. Well, it was the Army Air Force once. So I'll go from there. I'm old and clumsy. I wrote the script for this, or the advertising, and I said, duty, honor, and country. It's a West Point motto, not the Navy's motto, not the Air Force. I don't know how they feel about it, but it's pretty good. I stopped and thought about it. It's a pretty good. I was never in the military, but it sounds good. It sounds important. It strikes me that those 3 words are foundational for all of us as American citizens. Disagree with me if you wish, but they mean something to me. I'm a deeply loyal American. Like Michael, given what's going on in our country now, I feel a duty to honor those who came before me, those who went in the military, who served, those who have served our nation in other ways. I mean, there are plenty of people out there who worked at NASA and who worked in, social services, helping the elderly, helping the poor. They've served our country. So I have a great deal of respect for those who've served, and not just in the military. I feel a sense of duty myself, especially at this point in my life, to serve and honor our country by doing what I can to preserve this brilliant constitutional republic that Madison and Hamilton and Jefferson and the people left us. It's an incredible document, an incredible system that has stood 200 years plus of time, and other people envy. Other people have tried to copy it and got it their own way. But it's an incredible system. So I feel really blessed to personally have been a part of this country. And that's why I wanted to do this tonight. So I'm going to ask a few questions here of the 3 of you. Shoot away. I expect you to speak from your heart, your gut. And Dexter, youngest man who's picked this group.
I am.
Just barely old enough. Great.
Wow. Well, thanks, Bob, for having me. Duty, honor, country. I guess this started with me. My parents were both school teachers. My grandparents were school teachers. So they were serving. And somehow that came along to me when I was a 5th and 6th grade student at Graves Elementary in Memphis, Tennessee. I put the flag up every day for 2 years. Every day. And back then, ladies and gentlemen, the flag, if it rained, you had to take it down. That's right. You really did. It didn't stay up overnight, but every day, me and one of my classmates put that flag up with pride, with honor, and conviction for 2 years. That's where this started for me. I often go back to why did it mean so much? It was my service to the country as a 5th and 6th grade student. Then I got involved in ROTC, later became a commissioned officer, swore an oath. We'll get into some of that later, but this thing about duty and honor and country really means a lot to me. And I wouldn't be here talking about this if it didn't mean as much as it does. And I saw the sacrifices of so many soldiers that came before me, airmen, Navy corpsmen, et cetera, et cetera. So when I think of duty, honor, country, it really goes back to the oath that I swore in 1984. I can still recite it verbatim. That's what this thing means to me.
That oath?
Oh my gosh.
Speak it.
I, Dexter Henson, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I take this obligation willfully and freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which I'm about to enter, so help me God. And when I used to recite that, it still kind of hits me. I was a professor in military science many years ago, and I would commission young officers, and often I would recite this thing to them, and it hits me. That's what that oath means. Each and every time. I'm 63 years old. I retired 20 years ago. And when I recite that, there's this punch of what this means to me, and to see it eroded really just makes me sick to my stomach. But I do know that there are those that we've all trained, some of the others that have soldiers and sailors and airmen, Coast Guardsmen out there that had some really tremendous leaders out there, and they need guidance. And what I have a godson who's in the Navy right now, who's about to deploy. He says, Uncle Dexter, what do I do? I said, you take care of those men and women under your charge to the best of your ability. Duty, honor, country.
You joined ROTC in high school?
I joined ROTC in high school.
Just went to college, ROTC.
Went to college in ROTC. I was commissioned as a field artillery officer in 1984, active duty, and served in Afghanistan. I was the director of targeting one of the last combat tours that I had. So I was the director of targeting in Afghanistan for a year.
It never crossed your mind. And of course, you're post-Vietnam. You don't have that. But it was there. You knew about it. You're old enough, read the newspaper. It's a salvation. And you never hesitated to go from the ROTC on into the military.
No, I did not. And what's really, as I mentioned earlier, there's some jokes about, when you join, why do you join? And my sister and my parents were in the education field. Somebody said, well, why didn't you do well? And, I'm a captain in the United States Army. You should have done like your sister, became a teacher. And that's a joke in my family. But what you have, ladies and gentlemen of our military, are some of the most educated, well-trained individuals that will provide and sacrifice more than you will ever know. And that's what I really enjoy. And back to this duty and honor country, it goes to your, the role of when we met, your profession and the things that you're trying to do. I've got a colleague back here, and Joe, I'm going to point you out. I remember something that happened when I worked for Lockheed Martin when I first retired. And so we had flown an airplane for the first time, F-16, and it was probably Oman, and it was one of the first flights for this aircraft. And of course, I look up and see this airplane fly for the first time, and there are tears running down my face. And I look over at Joe, he's grabbed this handkerchief, and he says, and I said, well, you shouldn't feel this way, but he served as well. So there's the entire organization of the military industrial complex. There are people who love this country that don't necessarily have to wear the uniform, but seeing my colleague who was there grabbing for his tissue as well about that sound of freedom and what we're going to do to help protect and defend was something else that I'll never forget that moment. Joe, you probably don't remember that. Yeah. It really made a difference. I had just returned from Afghanistan, probably 6 months. And so there's still dust on my shoes. And the way I'll say it is there's a civilian that cares about this as much as I do. Yes, he did.
I think I was there. I think
Were you there?
I think you guys had me out there for that
Okay.
flight. Anyway,
I didn't know that.
nevertheless, Scott, and I'm going to move on to a little more stuff that goes back to where I've been from or my time. Scott, you came from an area where patriotism was a given.
Yeah.
Much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much.
You enlisted in the Air Force.
Yeah, I came from a small community. I was born a couple of years after the end of the war, World War II. Most of the adults who raised me had served in World War II. Bud, the grocer, and my little league coach. My Sunday school teacher, Chip the barber. I didn't know until a couple of years ago that Chip had landed in the third wave on D-Day, been wounded, and went on to fight in the Battle of the Bulge. And talking to his son, I found out that his father had suffered serious PSTD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, although it wasn't called that then. And Bud had taken him to the hospital, and he got over. We never saw any of that. They never talked about the war. They did not talk about it. There was no bragging. On Memorial Day, they would salute it. That was it. So those were the people I grew up with. And interestingly, not long thereafter, in the early 50s, the Cold War started. And when I was 9 years old, kind of like you, in Cub Scouts, they asked that the boys and their dads come to the courthouse. There was going to be an Air Force officer come. He needed our help. So we went to the little county courthouse in the courtroom there, and this Air Force captain said, he showed us some films. He said, we're starting something called the Ground Observer Corps. And the Ground Observer Corps was started because this was before NORAD and all the radars through Alaska and the Arctic Circle were built. They were trying to build it. And they wanted us to go out, this sounds ridiculous now, go out and watch for Russian bombers headed for Wichita to blow up the Boeing plants. Okay? And my father and my friend, his father, Bud, every Saturday for more than a year, we climbed into this rickety old training base tower that they put on the edge of town and watched for Russian bombers heading for Wichita. We were serious about it. I mean, and I look back on it and I think, okay, these dads had better things to do. It was exciting for us, but these dads had things to do. They served, no problem. And I felt a sense of service at that point, and a sense of, to your point, honor and purpose and duty that has stuck with me the rest of my years. Now, a quick story. We never saw a Russian bomber. But the last day we were up there, it was April. It was right before Easter, a Saturday, pouring rain. We couldn't see out of the tower. And all of a sudden we hear this roar of engines. I looked at my dad and he looked at me and I said, I think this is the one we call in. I think this is, we need to call it in. And he said, well, it's either a plane or a cattle truck out on the highway. But he said, you want to call it in? And we called it in. I don't know what happened after that, but it was an exciting time for me, but it was also a time of learning. And to your point about the joining the Air Force, Vietnam to me it sounded to me as I was going through high school and everything, and again, Western Kansas, that this was an important thing. This was a thing we needed to do. So I had no problem. First, I thought it would be interesting to just go over and work as a photojournalist and learn what was going on. But then when it came to it, and I was about to get drafted to join the Air Force, I worked at the National Security Agency for the last 2 years of my service. And by that time, the war was getting unpopular, really unpopular. And I was talking to a lot of my fellow servicemen who were coming back, and they were not happy. And they said, we shouldn't be in the war. So I went from being totally gung-ho to being, it was time to end the war. And, but I think at the same time, everyone I worked with in the military, the National Security Agency, all of us, and I was a staff sergeant, I wasn't, an officer or anything. Everyone did their work. Everyone pushed forward. That sense of duty and honor remained. And I think that's a powerful thing that we're losing in this country today, particularly, and it's not just the military. I think the sense of duty and honor is slipping, and I think it's something we've got to somehow get back.
Thank you for, you made that comment on what we taught. Hoping you would touch on that to remind you. Early, you were bound from day one.
Totally.
Whether you wanted to be or not, that's where you were going. What's that duty and honor to you? I mean, you were at the Texas A&M. I got here in, what was it, 99, and they had the bonfire thing. And I was so struck by the camaraderie, of Texas A&M. Of course, that's a lot later. But you were in the long ago in the Corps Cadets. You came out of that, then went in the military.
We had a bonfire.
You had a bonfire.
We had the largest bonfire ever. So yes, we had camaraderie. It was pretty significant. The duty to honor country, interesting. Duty I look at fairly simply. If you're an A&M student or you start out as a private, you're told what to do. You get up, you do it. Your days are all about what somebody else is telling you to do and you're learning. And then you advance and you're a company officer. Your duties are to teach, to lead, to make something happen. So the duty extends as you advance further. If you're a general, generals have different responsibilities. And today, for example, I would say that their responsibility is to advise the president about things that the military could do and can't do. That's their duty. They must do it whether they like to do it or not. That's their duty. So at every level, you have different responsibility that you must do. I make that assumption because I've told you the story, and I'll tell you again. I don't know whether this is working or not. Yeah. But I go back when I was a young boy, and my father was an aide to a 4-star general, Air Force, General Freddie Smith, Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force. General in World War II, also commanded 7th Air Force, Pacific, and a few other places, and I got to be there and be a part of his life. But one of the things that happened is my father was on the way to the Pentagon in 1962 to take his job when General Smith was there. And they just, like most military people, they call him the old man. That's the old man. We're going to go the old man. And he had a camaraderie of people. They felt a duty to him because he was so good. His father-in-law was Admiral King, by the way. And if you don't know who Admiral King was, he was the most foul-mouthed admiral that ever lived. But he was really good at what he did in World War II, leading in the Navy. But anyway, in 1962, General Smith went into a meeting. He went into a meeting with Secretary of State McNamara, President Kennedy, and I'm sure there were others in that small little meeting. And they asked, and this relates to where we are today. It relates to Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. And they said, "What do you think we ought to do in Vietnam?" And he had written a one-page paper and handed it to him and said, "You should never send any troops or send anybody on the ground into Vietnam, ever. But if you really want to explore doing something, in Vietnam, and you want to win a war there, there's only one option. You drop a limited thermonuclear weapon on Hanoi, and you walk away." That was it. And, well, McNamara fired him the next day. But you get the point. That was his duty. That was his duty to respond that way, to let them know what they should do or should not do. And every four-star general, vice chief of staff, whatever, has that responsibility to advise the civilian authorities that we have out there about what they should do and what they should not do. Honor to me is pretty basic too. You honor those before us and those past. And country is just about people. We the people. Because the military doesn't operate without the will of the people. And if you don't want to give the people the budget to operate the military or have to do it, then we the people matter. So things like this today are everything about we the people.
When you got to Vietnam, yes, I did. When you got to Vietnam,
And you're running convoys, supplies, whatever, to different places. You're seeing it up close firsthand. You're 1971,
Yes.
so we're well on the way to trying to figure out how to get the hell out.
It was we were on the downside of the war.
Yeah.
We'd gone from 550,000 in 1970 to 1971. We're down to 325,000 soldiers.
When you talk to when you were on the ground, when you're talking to other troops, you have to know what's going on around the country to some extent. I'm sure they didn't tell you everything that was going on in this part of the country or that part of the country. What was the perception you were getting, and how did that sit with you and the others around you who were hearing these things?
Wow. I was pretty gung-ho coming out of A&M. I volunteered to go to Vietnam. It was a thing to do. You're military. My father's military. Be military all the way. Vietnam was not what I expected. When you're in combat or you do those kind of things, there's a thrill that everybody gets into. I hate to say it, but you get on a high until you're not, and it's just the way it is. The reality, though, of the everyday world was not that way, because I ran convoys, a couple times a week for 6 months. But the other time you're at base camp. And what do you do at base camp? Well, I divided up all my troops in the company I was in Phu Thai, outside of Quy Nhon, where we'd run convoys to Pleiku, down Highway 17. And it was very interesting. There were a third of the soldiers that were alcoholics. There were a third of the soldiers that were drug addicts. And there were a third of the soldiers that were actually operational, and you could rely on every day to get in their trucks and drive without killing somebody. The soldiers told you everything about the way of the world back then. And they were telling everybody, me and everybody else, that this is not a good war. It was a stupid war. And why are we here? It was by the time I left, it was fairly obvious to me that we'd wasted a lot of lives. I look at Vietnam very similarly, like I look at where we are today in Iran. I think we're wasting lives on doing something pretty stupid. We did the same thing in Iraq, looking for weapons of mass destruction, and we did the same thing in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, you go after a bad guy, you kill him, then you get out. I think we unlearned the lessons of Vietnam because you're not going to change the people of a country. We're not nation builders. And, I look at Iran, we're not going to change 92 million people into something else. We're just not going to do it. And you can bomb them like all you want. Or we're just going to harden their hearts.
Perfect segue, I guess. Got an email the other day from H.R. McMaster. And most of you have probably heard of H.R. McMaster. He rose to significant fame in the first Gulf War, commanding a armored brigade or something, and they, in the middle of the desert, and they took out the Iraqis pretty bad. He's risen in service, and he's well thought of. He was a national security advisor in the first Trump administration. He didn't last very long, a couple of months, few weeks, might have been longer than that. I don't remember. One of several national security advisors in the first Trump administration. But HR wrote a piece this week that says, and I'd like to hear certainly Vietnam benefit, how long Iran's theocratic dictatorship will last and how it will come to its demise is unclear. But the dictatorship in Tehran will not survive this campaign. It's hard to imagine President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and Gulf leaders accepting terms for an end of hostilities that leaves in place a hostile regime that continues to threaten their citizens and their economies. I have no idea how this war is going to work out, except I'm certainly getting the impression that the regime is just going to dig in a little deeper, hide out a little farther apart. There is no sign that there is a revolt. This sounds familiar, as you probably know, but you military guys, what do you think? We're going to win this war tomorrow? Next week?
Of course not. But one of the things we're not good at, we don't build nations. And that's what my time in Afghanistan, I saw that, and the numerous villages and provinces that I went to, you could do something and, get rid of the Taliban in one province. 6 months later, 2 weeks later, somebody else takes over. And they wait us out, either with the weather or no one goes back to check on what's been going on in that particular province. So we're still, without having a national strategy of exactly what we're doing, it's just repeating itself all over again from Vietnam. And really, that's what I see as a military guy looking at this. But the geopolitical side of this thing has to give the military an objective. And it goes back to where we are, what you said initially, is the military does not go in and just say, we're going to do this, but the civilian leadership has to give us an objective. And I'm still saying us because I still wear that Army green in my heart.
Scott?
First of all, I'm a 78-year-old former staff sergeant, so don't pretend to know strategy, okay? I work for Giffords. The reason I'm here is you called Giffords, and I think you were looking for Mark Kelly.
We invited Mark Kelly to come.
And I'm here, so I'm sorry to disappoint you. Question for you. I came as much because I wanted to hear about this organization because it intrigues me, and I read your principles, and I think I'm here and you're here, and we have the same principles. I think it's the labels that's killing us. I think when it comes to war, we've got to worry first. We, people in this room, have to worry about the war that's going on in this country. How many of you today went to King's Day?
No. I hope.
Yeah. It was good. We were in Irving, and there was probably over 1,000 people, would you say? 1,000 people? Garland, sorry. Yes. Yes. Leading chants. And I saw people with courage and duty and honor at that march. I think we have to get people. I think we have to mobilize voters. I think we have to really focus on our war going on here, and do what we can to end it. Because until we do that, I think we're in a bad way. I think our military, frankly, I have a son in the Air Force, who's a major now. I look at him and I look at the military now, and I still feel this sense of duty and honor. That's in the military. It's there. I'm less worried about the military itself than I am those in charge or think they're in charge of leading the military.
But if I may, if we don't get this partisanship where the civilian leadership are still out here separating our military, that camaraderie, that esprit de corps, that's a word that we used to use in the military, esprit de corps, spirit in the unit. If you walked in and you saw 20 people, saw soldiers or airmen together, and the way the banter with that, there is nothing like that power of esprit de corps within a unit. If whatever the mission is, and you say, let's go squadron, let's go squad, let's go platoon, those guys, those men and women will do anything and will use all the talents of everyone they have to accomplish a mission. Watching this thing from my time, I retired in 2005, and I felt that way pretty much 90% of the time, that every unit that I served in had this spirit of units in it. But when you start going down and saying, whoa, and this person's, got promoted because they were not qualified. These people go through all kinds of boards to achieve ranks of general officers, 06 colonels, etc. And all that does is split and divide the United States military. That's my belief of what this thing is. But to your point of get out and do things, let's go vote, let's go sacrifice our time, volunteer for these campaigns. You're absolutely correct. But I just have to say that's my belief of what's happening to the U.S. military. I don't know if you felt the same way and watching this thing. We never talked about politics when I was serving in the military. There were some things that happened, some policies that occurred that I didn't like. And I go, well, okay, that's not something that we're going to talk about in my youth. But right now it's so out in front, and almost every headline about something being woke. I really don't know what that means. And so we've labeled it somehow, and it means somebody's not qualified to be an admiral, somebody's not qualified to be a general. And that does nothing to help those men and women that are serving.
You three were the most great. Michael was in the military. Larry Bolin out there was in the military. Who else? Raise your hands. Okay. I want to know what your any of you reaction was when Pete Hegseth, well, first it was Trump, but then Pete Hegseth said he's going to go after Mark Kelly, strip him of his retirement benefits, attacked Alyssa Slotkin. I mean, 6 members of the United States Congress. And, I don't have the highest regard for some of our Congress people, but these 6 all served in the military. Pete Hegseth put 30, Mark Kelly, I believe, put in close to 30 years. With astronaut, I mean, yeah, a fighter pilot, and this actor, really, and this is my opinion, actor secretary of war goes back and trashes these people. But your opinions.
Anybody.
You went out there?
Anybody need a microphone? Or Ebola?
They're probably on Doctor.
I just know you have a finish.
I don't know this audience, so I don't know what to say.
What did you think? And Pete Hegseth trashes a 30-year veteran.
What do you think? I think that's person just Jenny. This is Daddy and not widow. I think my son is a better, and I think he was responding from duty, honor, and integrity to the castigation of the 6 people or the military to disobey anything that they just think would right from the Trump administration, which undermines that full ethos of the military. So in my opinion, Hector should probably not have said what he did, but also the 600 people did not said it. It's just part of this whole massive growing up where you're talking about the war within. That's part of the war within. You laugh a lot about so. I didn't like that. That's what he was talking about. What they did to watch for Russian planes, because during the World War II, the entire coast of California put down their shades and turned out their lights every star's house. And people did that because people used to feel loyalty and patriotism for this country. We were falls in this country. We're not a human. That's really what they're saying up here, if I like. That the war within is the latest problem.
Well, we're gonna talk in a minute about rules of war and rules of engagement. But Larry's going. Larry's a friend of mine. We walk in the park together. He watches my dogs.
It's kind of loose. He has a dog the other way.
And the dog likes him.
With the dog was something. I called the pig is Oliver. Your mother-in-law won't let you?
Yeah,
And
mother-in-law. You have to deal with that woman over there.
anybody else like a walk-ons? Nobody. This is the wrong group to make this. I love golf. They're loyal. They know aren't healed. They put up with nonsense from humans who own them. They're brave. But anyway, that's my little speech on dogs. Now let's talk about. You want to talk about what? The
Well, I did the reactions when he takes up the tax. Well, the whole he's gonna pull Marquette.
here's the thing. This is a brave matter. There is no black and white. Does anybody ever think that anything is black and white? There's only one thing that's black and white. That's Jesus Christ died for us, and that's really black and white. Everything else besides that is black and gray. So I was listening to you, sir. So what these politicians is, and they were all distinguished military service officers, they would said that if you have a illegal order, then it is your moral duty to not follow it. They didn't say that. That's my word, but that's what he said, right? You agree?
I agree.
I agree with that. Absolutely. Did some politicians have to tell people in uniform that? Absolutely not. That should be coming from their commanding officers, starting with their NCO. That means the NCO is a non-commissioned officer. Let me tell you, having served, I saw more leadership coming out as senior NCOs than I ever saw out of the commissioned officer. And I've worked with books. Does everybody know what an NCO is? What is NCO?
Non-commissioned officer.
Oh, I mean. It's so if you have a non-commissioned officer and you're just showing up for your basic training and you're scared of anybody who's like God, that has 1 or 2 strikes. So you say, sir, and then what's the first thing that non-commissioned officers say? Don't call me sir.
Yes, absolutely. I did work. And they had the leadership. But going back to the point, Irani was up clear. This is a gray area. I don't agree. I don't agree with the politicians that said that. I agreed with what they said, but it needs to be said by their chain of command. Sorry, at the very top. And who's the very top in chain of command? Marriage. What do they call? Yes, sir. Are you listening? You should do that. A lot of people don't know that. Yes. So from the very top, it needs to come down, and everybody in uniform, man, woman, everybody needs to hear that over and over again. Because I tell you that this isn't something that's just an academic exercise. I was faced with making decisions, a few of them that I still remember, that I was getting in order, and I didn't think it was morally right. It's a very, very hard thing to be in, and I'm not going to tell you what I decide. But well, you're placed in that position. Sometimes you will get to have time to reflect and make all the, well, if I did this, well, man, I can do this. You don't have time to do this. Frequently, you have to make a quick decision. I'm going to throw out a name here. Oh, you gave me the microphone. William Colley. Name resonated with you? Lieutenant. What calls her? Lieutenant Glasper. Yeah. Kelly. I said, it on the accent. I don't want to pretend. Did you kiss a microphone in your mouth, Sam? And we know that just a repeat. I was. That's. You what? Well, that's fun. Yeah. Show me that's good. These somebody's listening. So here's the thing. Will Colley was at the My Law Book Massacre. First lieutenant, and he's the officer in charge. And the people in his command just took their F-16s, their machine guns, and just massacred all of these big civilians. There was the one pilot, a Huey pilot, said his helicopter down. You know this thing. Are you there? Okay. So, I mean, it's cut you like us, you know, I wasn't there, but I was not quite. It's actually what you wasn't you. Was it 08 BTS? Yeah. Yep. So he had a chief that, and he told him if they didn't stop firing, he's going to fire upon the American shoulder. That's what stopped more people from getting massacred. So, I'm going to tell this story. Go ahead and look that up. Find out what happened for Kelly. And also find out that was then caught at the war call for years. May still be in I don't know. So, that is my story.
Okay. Thanks, Larry. Thank you. Okay, gentlemen, Scott, Early, you can find another seat, you will. Well, I go put for now. I want to invite Margaret Donovan up here. Margaret is was 6 years in the United States Army, Judge Advocate General Corps. In other words, she was a lawyer. She gave direction on what the Army, the military could do, who they could shoot at, who they could target.
Hello.
Hello. This is working. Okay, I'll hold it up closer. Oh, okay, that's even better.
Or should I go center?
Yeah, just sit down here.
Great. Right there? Oh, great.
I've never dealt with the Judge Advocate Generals. I don't believe in my journalism career, so probably they don't get that. That's a good thing. But I have enormous respect, for the rule of law in civilian life, and enormous respect for the rule of law, such as it can be determined in the military life. So I wanted to talk to you about some of these issues, which we've heard about. talk about the rules of war. We'll talk about the rules of war and the rules of engagement. And I want to quote our Secretary of Defense/War. He said this to the generals and admirals last year. 800 men and women who put their whole lives into this business or this career or this, whatever you want to call it, of being a military officer. We don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our war fighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement, just common sense, maximum lethality, and authority for warfighters. What's different than that? What silly rules of engagement? Can you explain some of these rules of engagement?
Sure. So, but just a little bit of background. I think from my own personal experiences that Baby will color some of my comments here. I did 2 combat deployments. In 2016, I deployed under President Obama as the commander-in-chief to Baghdad, Iraq. And I worked in what's called a strike cell. The strike cell is a room, operational center, Myers in Baghdad, and it prosecutes all airstrikes in a given area. I had Al-Amar province, and we were receiving strikes from something called the Hidden Defect Corridor, which is basically Middle Euphrates River Valley, mostly clearing cities called Ramadi and Fallujah. You may remember those cities because they were originally cleared by American troops after the 2003 invasion, but I decided during 2016. I was there in 2016 because a group called the Islamic State had taken over that part of Iraq. And it had taken root after President Obama had withdrawn troops in 2011 in an effort to leave Iraq. So I went in 2016, and I easily as a lawyer, as a JAD officer, and I was giving commanders legal advice on airstrikes. Basically, could we kill, can you kill them, when to kill them? And I did that for about half a year, and then I left Iraq, and I less than a year later was stabbed with a group called Fifth Special Forces Group. President Obama then allowed women to be lawyers during Marines. So I was the first woman to hold that position in that battalion. And I went back to an upper strike cell outside of Raqqa, Syria. And the Islamic State was basically the center of the caliphate for that. And before my first deployment in 2017, of course, was under then first President Trump. So I had 2 different executive commanders across those 2 deployments. And I also floated the High-Year campaign as the Islamic State issued. We were doing it in lot of airstrikes. And so my full layering day, it was both engaging in the law part conflict for both of those deployments. Before I deployed in 2016, you were doing something called I remember this, that basically like a working exercise. Before you deploy, you simulate going into battle. And it was my first combat deployment, so I was nervous, and I remember being at the war games and being worried about getting the commanders the wrong advice or being too aggressive or not aggressive enough. And before we deploy, I watched as did the rest of the world get ready pilot get earned a life on national PP by the Islamic State. Fallen and was verified and ejected from an aircraft captured by the Islamic State, and our organization is known for televised and quite brutal executions. Right before I left, 3 months before I left, the Islamic State attacked Paris, France, what's known as the Paris attacks in 2015. Absolutely horrific adversary and meeting, and did not recognize Geneva. The Geneva Conventions did not recognize all conflict, did not recognize NATO, the UN Charter, and had absolutely no recognition of Musky civilization or the norms, the post-World War II wars that governed warfare since then. And when we went to war, we were up against some of, as I said, the most brutal of all enemies over the last few decades. And what separated us from them
is that when we had civilian casualties and the kappa, you do it on airstrikes, we're going to strike civilians. It is an unfortunate fact of war. That's why we should not go to war, because that things like that happen. What separated us at the end was that we followed these impeachments. We had a moral high ground, and we had a commitment to principles. And that is what makes the United States military as great as it is. That is why other countries were up to us. That is why we were able to form international alliances and indeed those not alliances. Because people trust that they're a country on their principles and not saying by whims or goal vitale. Anything can be legal, right? With you, my goal. Any good can be legal. That's not the goal. The goal is to be right, to be morally right, to have principles, to be the country that other countries look at and say, that's who I want to rebel with. So to me, the rules of engagement are not silly, they are necessary. And by the way, there are rules of engagement. It is how to engage the enemy. And that is something I used to train other lawyers on. It's okay that I train our humanitarians on, I work with. It is how to properly engage the enemy. It is not meant to hold you back. It is not the goal to you back. I think you have a very improper view of how to conduct warfare.
Thank you. That's fascinating. We hear so much. PTAX had essentially said that the rules of war constrained us. Afghanistan, Iraq, I guess, what he was referring to. Michael, you were on the ground in Afghanistan. You're leading troops, Indian territory, so to speak. Were you constrained in particular ways? I'm sure there were. Did this somehow put your mission in danger, more danger? I think I got a mic on. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to express. I never personally built strength by tools and data. I played twice. The first time, you have all these briefs. When the first time our JAG said, basically, if you guys don't follow the rules, we will throw the book at you and we'll put you in the brief. Not to that's way low bash, right? Very dangerous place you're going to march Afghanistan. So that was not great. On that deployment, we were fine despite that sort of weird brief. The second, the second JAG, the second climate said, we are here to help you do your jobs. You're going to be in a very complicated place. You're going to be ethical, gray areas. You're not going to quite, you're going to be scared. You're going to get a whole lot of pressure. If you follow the magic formula, which is basically Azerbaiji plus hostile intent or hostile action, and then you make a decision to kill somebody, and then you find out later on that it turns out that wasn't the right decision. But if you can honestly look me in the eye and say, I was trying to follow the rules of engagement, I will have your back. And I'm going to be there whenever somebody tries to throw the book at you. So it was a way of giving these young, scared, filled with adrenaline, testosterone, these 19-year-old kids, a way to sort of process the very dangerous place they were among into. All right, so it's not just that I wasn't constrained by it, but actually it helped us do our job better. A caveat here is I don't speak for everybody in the military, right? But I don't think I was ever constrained. I really don't think most people were really constrained. All right, second thing that I will sit down is I had a battalion commander who said it was very important for us to come back with our honor clean. All right. Not really at the forefront of the minds of the guys, of the Marines before we went over there, but he kept saying there's a reason why he was a lieutenant colonel. We were two lieutenants. He kept saying, I want you to come back with your honor clean, because he understood what happens. It's horrible whenever atrocity happens to civilians. We all understand that. Remember, that also can screw up the Marines who do that because they have poor leadership, because they weren't trained properly. So, the rules of engagement are also there to protect you for the rest of your life, so that whenever you are 50, 60, 65, looking back on your combat experience, you don't have these horrible things hanging around your neck. Just for instance, I'm very pro-Ukrainian and whatnot, but I sort of feel for a lot of
the Russian soldiers were 19 years old, they're committing atrocities, and they're not put death for the rest of their lives.
Dexter, you have anything to add? You were shooting at things.
Well, I served as a director targeted in Afghanistan for both 3 to 04. So those rules of engagement really helped define my elective off limits. I was given a mission set that said, what equipment can I use? I got HNs. I can sit in the Rangers. I can use artillery. And so it was really at the strength, not at the strength, but it really helped ensure that the mission set that we were given was not exceeded. So where it's just overkill. I hate to use that word, overkill. Why would you want to, continually use an artillery case on something that's already been destroyed or neutralized? So it really helps ensure that as a unit, that you're really not overstepping your bounds. So I use legal exact all the time in all decisions that I had to make as a target director. Each and every time that there was a mission set that I was going to send someone out.
Thank you, sir. So the two of you were in Afghanistan. Pretty place got ugly after a while. Got ugly in the beginning. But you were not hampered, prohibited from doing your job by the ridiculous rules of engagement. Okay. Margaret, you were on a podcast last week, I heard, with General Hartland. Fascinating guy. God, I'd love to talk to him. He's so full of energy and smart, and he's a machine. You said in that podcast, and this struck me immediately. Trump had just said, if the Iranians don't open the Straits of Hormuz in the next 48 hours, I'm going to blow all their power plants to smithereens or something to that effect. You said that threat or that action, were it to be done, could quite possibly violate the rules of war. Well, I go back to, I wasn't around, World War II. We bombed everything.
Yeah.
And those were total war. We were set to conquer. We were trying to wipe out governments, armies, everything else. We haven't declared war against anybody in a very long time. We haven't declared a war. We haven't even, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. What are we calling this stuff?
That's a very good question. But I think I know what you're asking at, how to take it in pieces here. First of all, my comments on the power plants were caveated by, of course, that I don't have all of the intelligence. I'm a civilian now. I don't know what the intelligence reports look like. I don't know what the poll was. I don't know if it's a way to actually properly apply what call 4 principles of the law of conflict to that particular proposed strike with such strikes. But what I was explaining was that there are 4 principles. The rules may be very specific, right? They are specific to a theater, they are specific to a particular campaign. The law of conflict underpins all of our investigation, and law of conflict has 4 principles: military necessity, proportionality, distinction, and the rational necessary summary. And so my analysis of doing a strike at a power plant, in my opinion, that fails all 4 of those, principally because it appeared that it's not necessary to reach a military objective. The president's goal appeared to be lowering oil prices or lowering gas prices. That's not to say that you cannot target civilian structures. You absolutely can. And in fact, it did it quite frequently in a self-defense posture, and all the other combat era tenure did as well. Something can use a protected status that is being used for a military purpose. So my analysis of those 4 principles was that it is not militarily necessary. If it was not actually boot to a military objective, we're not sending ground troops in. There would be no reason to down the electrical grid for the civilians. It would not be proportional to an economic gain and economic advantage. It was not distinguishing within its civilian population. It was now done in a way that will prevent unnecessary suffering. But taking a little bit of a step back most of the legal frameworks that govern the rules of engagement of the law of conflict, either now or in the decades probably since 1949, actually, when the first signed and ratified Geneva Conventions. Those are something in Post-World War II, and I think it was Dresden, is my best to a rough bullet point by the time you go through with it. But at the close of World War II, in the shadow of everything that happened here, the Grace generation committed this country to several different international agreements that ended up being quite formative for the years to come. It's not aspirational at times, but it was certainly a strong backdrop to how we conducted warfare since that time. And topping it up for you on is principally one is a UN Charter, if you signed and ratified. The other is all 48 conventions. The conventions themselves we've signed and ratified. It's about the additional protocols we have not. And NATO. And so you had these four very robust and consequential legal agreements that this administration has simply then discarded as if it is some greasy concept of international law because applicable. But in fact, it has those agreements and designed that by Congress. So they are actually domestic law. That's my first point on those frameworks. They are actually domestic law. And they are actually binding. In fact, violating Geneva and could subject to criminal liability in the United States or IT. But my second point is that my opinion is that that was our heritage from the race generation. That was something that they saw the horrors that civilian populations withstood. They saw the moral injury that switchers took home from them, from those wars. And they tried to give us a framework and tools and ability to prevent that from happening again by entering into those agreements. And so it really pains me to see them so callously discarded by this administration. And as I just certainly hope that if you get back to a place that we don't feel you need to enter into another international agreement or be to correct everything that has happened. And so I think your last point, and I will succinctly summarize this, I promise. I don't need their huge chance to hear me talk about the War Powers Act, but you're correct. We have not technically declared war since Pearl Harbor. And there is intention in the House Constitution between Article 1 and Article 2. Article 1, or giving to the legislature, contains the declare war clause. And it also contains a clause that says that Congress, the legislature, is responsible for raising its subordinate armies. There's a tension between that and Article 2, which places the president as the commander-in-chief. And so what the War Powers Act did in 1973 was try to resolve that tension in favor of Congress. And it did so by saying, look, Commander-in-Chief, we may be sort of seeing the board duty because we're casting these two anti-cash offense authorization acts. We're allowing you to respond to self-defense. We watch you commit troops to Vietnam and Korea. But we're going to rein that in now. And if you are going to commit U.S. ground forces to hostilities, which is a specific word that Congress chose at that point, additionally the graphical legislations that are on the conflict and changed that craze to hostilities. And that was because the time Nixon was buying Cambodia, Congress wanted it to cover more actions than just during conflict. And so Congress passed that out to basically say, you've got to tell us in 60 days, about a 60-day clock when you commit troops to hostilities, and we're going to rein you in. So I can expand on that if you want me to, but basically the upshot of all of that is that the Constitution will resolve that tension between the executive and the legislative branch in favor of the legislative branch. What's happening right now is that Congress is not flexing its muscle to take back his war powers in an appropriate way. They are ceding authority to the executive in the world, in the universe of war powers. And I looked up this one quote, but I got this interesting. It's from a letter Thomas Jefferson to James Madison in 1789. Do you know what about cycle? Okay. It was in 1789, and he's writing, Jefferson was writing this, and to basically, this is right after the Constitutional Convention, to basically congratulate each other on the declare war clause. And she wrote about the third, Jefferson wrote about the Terror War Clause. It's an effectual check to the dog of war by transferring the power of letting him loose from the executive to the legislative body. So I would submit it was very clearly the framers' intent. When you're going to commit ground troops, whether it's 2,000 grades, 5,000 from the Secretary of War, or the next 17,000 humming, that level of commitment, I think, rests with Congress. And every president since 1973 says war powers acted unconstitutional. So that's, I just punch you right as I say. And rightly so, right? I mean, no commander-in-chief wants their power checked. But I just offer that to you to say that is my position. It may not be everybody's position, but it is my position that Congress does have the power. The executive's answer to that is, you're seeing it to me, so now I have it. And that tension, unfortunately, is playing out in your time right now.
And since then, there have been several instances. Well, I think every president has committed military force something.
Yes.
Since that I can remember. And several times Congress has said, what are you doing? Why? We didn't give you authority. Or we want this back. And pretty much every president said, thumb their nose at it.
I think they've said you're still funding. And it's politically palatable to say you're turn off funding to the military and have troops overseas. No, I'm right. No, common sense politicians want to do that. So Congress is sort of tied themselves into this arm.
Well, our Congress has become pretty, over the last many, many years, has ceded a lot of authority. It's budgetary authorities. It's a lot of things over the last 20, 30, 40 years. It seems to be increasingly ceding. This Congress is doing almost nothing. It takes 60 days to pass a continuing resolution of some kind. We're certainly losing the congressional check on the executive branch. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think that the framers saw the treaty of Terror War Clause and power of purse to be hammers that would be corruptible and not the executive branch. And unfortunately, because, again, my opinion, not every day is, but because we have leaders in Congress that do not have principles, they are ceding that authority to the executive branch, and we are all oversported in this particular area, especially.
Thank you. I'm old enough to be a history nerd, and I can remember some Congresses where things got done. They took a while. Anybody here remember the Tax Reform Act during the Reagan administration, which was like 3 or 4 years in the works? Ernest Hollings, Bill Bradley, Dick Gephardt. I'm trying to think of some, Jack Kim. And out of that came arguably what I would say was the most significant piece of legislation in my lifetime. When they rewrote the tax code from top to bottom, I was a newspaper reporter making $25,000 a year. And I had about 25 or 30-page tax return. I had to file by an accountant, or at least prepared by an accountant. All of a sudden, I went to a 6-page tax return. Cost me some money. I didn't get to deduct my credit card expenses or whatever. But as long as that took, and as hard as it was, and there were some unsavory deals cut. Time magazine won a Pulitzer Prize reporting on 20 separate votes to get 20 separate breaks for people. But that's Congress. That was its job. And for the first time, they reined in tax breaks for oil fields and racehorses and real estate deals. This is what our Congress was supposed to do. And it seems like that's 40 years ago. I'm that old. Less and less is our Congress exerting leadership and direction and policy.
Well, I think the beauty of the representative democracy is that the people truly are speaking. And we had so much as the Council's peace and the executive branch of Congress to what we're doing around. We placed through our elected representatives and probably the responsible the way the framers envisioned it. But we don't have that right now. And I think that is through a lack of problems here. You don't have a demand from Congress for the intelligence, for the information, for the justification that we had in all priorities to the military force.
Which kind of brings us back to principles first. And I don't mean so much the group. I'm supporting this group and involved. But what's happened to the where are we at in our country that we keep re-electing people who don't do their jobs, who don't pass budgets, who don't look at the tax bills they're leading the future generations, who hand the Congress, who hand the president a blank check to go out and start wars. And I just throw that out there for all of you. I don't know if any of us have the answers. We've heard people talk tonight about the bipartisanship and the need for bipartisanship. My God, we've got to somehow jack these people up and give them some marching orders to do. And I don't know how we go about that. That's Michael. You're the guy that's going to get to fix that in your next role.
That's nice.
Yeah. Well, he's already run for Congress once, and I don't know if he learned his lesson or not. One last round at the war here. Depending on the day of the week, the audience, Trump seems to be throwing stuff against the wall. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. This happens, that happens. And I'm Margaret, you're as allowed to answer this as anybody in this room. Did any of you feel like we have any clue, strategy, plan? If you do, raise your hand, please. For how we get out of this war, or how it ends.
Yeah, I think there's that thing in place, but we are not privy to it. Nor should we be. Nor should Congress be. Because they have, shall we say, East lips.
Okay.
Can't trust half the Congress, and they have is too done doing it.
Well, hard to disagree with that. I don't know. Again, I go all the way back to Vietnam. Iraq was roughly 20 years. Afghanistan was roughly 20 years. I don't think we left any of those three places better than we found them. Iraq, maybe a little bit. I don't, yeah.
I don't think it's better theirs. I think it's legal system, the culture we're in, the media. There's a lot of things going on. I don't think you can point to one. We have an incompetent, probably senile commander-in-chief that for some people have decided to elect. That is the problem we're facing this right now. And you talked about congressional action or inaction. Until we could see some leadership in Congress, I don't care for which party. No, that's the time. Right now, our government was broke. It's broke, and I hope groups like this focus on that, because I think that's what we've got to do if we're looking at catching our country a bad race.
Thank you. Michael, you're raising up.
Well, I was just curious if you ever overrode or told the commander no. And what were the circumstances around that?
Yeah, I did ask that question, because, Heads Up had some type of bad experience with the jet, right? I think that's probably the root of something with his hostility towards them. And I can tell you, having done well over 1,000 strikes as a conservative estimate, I had never told a commander no, which sounds trouble, right? Because probably going to wear top the commander no once in a while. But the reason for that is because the military, when properly functioning, a strike cell that is properly functioning, has a job officer and lawyer integrated within the strike planning process in the timing process. So you are part of the facet to develop the strike. And so if there were ever an instance where a strike where I thought we didn't do one of those core principles, so we were outside of goal submission, we did properly account for a smelly power of life, I just talked to the people saying a strike and said, let's adjust, let's do this or that. And you would call something that's called the targeted engagement effort. That's the person under President Obama, I was pals with one star level under President Trump that went to a was all raffle scanners. But the person is based in the last authority on the theory of strike. You wouldn't go to the targeted engagement authority until everybody was in agreement. So I actually never told a matter now a strike because I was telling the planners no early on before I'd approached the commander. I have, in a few instances, told the commander or had conversation with the commander explaining that while the strike was deeply supportable and I will go down with the ship if, this causes some or if to that because you had a self-defense or I said it will, though it's justified how, you caper a file if you have to. But I had conversations that's very so about there's a phrase, can you, should you, must you. And the answer, the first one, legally, can you do a strike, is dex. Should you, that's different consideration, and must you is different consideration. And so the strikes that I had those conversations, they were legally defensible. And had you ever in question, I would have been right next to the other side saying, I said yes, I approved the strike that they would vice horrible. But the instance that I'm thinking of, I talked about this brief old podcast. Sorry, I'm repeating myself.
A little rough.
We were re-clearing Fallujah because remember, Harry made clear at the Americans before Iraq's scholar. And we were partnered up with the Iraqi National Army, which, by the way, think about that from 2016 when American troops allied with the Iraqi National Army. It were at the size stake. And there was one rain hospital of Fallujah, and we were taking fire from it. And they had to kick out physicians, and we were taking friendly force casualties as the force against Timor clearance. And so in self-defense posture, you can strike that all day, 7 days a week. You're going to have a legal for the personal self-defense. But it was being actively used in the hospital, and it was the last community aid center in Fallujah. And so my memory of that was in the strike still, as friendly force casualties are coming in through radio, having a conversation with the commander about whether or not to strike and what type of munitions to use and what would be the least, what it would cause the least amount of collateral damage, and also just to be ready, because when we deployed, it was a few months after a bombing being used and gas him arrived by Wilder's Hospital, which is a horrific escape by the U.S. military, also not a war crime. And so we had a discussion of what we would do if the New Year sounded and if we had to top the Secretary of Defense, from Washington and describe it there. But I can never, because the lawyers are in the American ones very integrated very early on the target process, I never told the commander because we were ranky, in my opinion, part of a process simple time.
God, that could have been interesting, just been a fly on the wall.
Yeah. You also, on top of being a little bit verbose here, because I've been in the academic role for a while, but you can imagine that in a strike cell, if I said anything more than like 5 seconds of speeding, career, okay, that's the nest. So you literally recite those odds.
All right, we're going to try to wrap this up and move on. Does anybody have a question for Margaret? Yes, sir.
Just going back to the rules of engagement question. As a non-military person, I think one of the things that the sense that I get about this administration is that it's unfair for us to live by principles, and be constrained by principle when maybe your enemy is not, so to be straight. So could you talk about, address that and kind of explain that to non-military people about why that's a kind of wrong-headed way to think about this?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was kind of what I started out with, right? Like That's what separates us. That's what makes America. That is what makes America great, in my opinion. The fact that we have principles, the fact that we know that if we take prisoners of war, we're not going to mistreat them. And so I think that it's important both to soldiers as well as like the spray, like Maple was just saying, and Dexter was just saying. I think that that's important for people to be able to literally sleep at night when you come back from war and you understand that you were operating within a framework and war is bad. And my opinion, for those who memes and videos on us of what war is like, you don't really know for stuff. And so I think that that helps people high micro level cope with it. But on macro level, I think that it strengthens us because you see that our countries want to fight alongside us. And all the way back to the American Revolution, we had been relying on international alliances to get through our products. And so I think that it also strengthens our position reputationally in the global sense. And the troubling trend I've seen, and we've all seen, in the Caribbean, whether it was with strikes or in our sort of maybe not take Greenland by force, and in what we're trying to do right now, really control the Strait of Hormuz, in trouble generalizing the allies that the holiday US at the drop of a hat are no longer there. And you can say what you want about, what the other countries have done, but the EU United States, we cannot do this on our own. And that is true not just the military life, but in the form of the intelligence that we get. Not be sure, but other countries is strengthened us from a strategic perspective to actually have sheer intelligence on all of violations. And I think that it just bodes well for our reputation abroad and allies' ability to rely on us and want to fight alongside us so they know that we are ratified rules.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, let's look through the other thoughts that I'm at as you just speaking and here you.
What did it you just three best? So one thing, see back out the world began. I think and transparency, I was in the day for 8 years. I was an intelligence officer. Heard a little bit about Afghanistan. Well, I kind of come back and that is now, but it's now a little drag over in a second. But so the rules in the game to me are they don't inhibit me. So it's just make sure that you've been in the right way. And I think that if I say Afghanistan happens to happen because of the Soviet Union, also probably Afghanistan, and losing pretty bad. And so in that instance, I firmly believe that if you're at a train, it better click and you had a clear strategy, so you're very likely to win. And so in Soviet Union's case, they, while not quite to the United States level, were much better trained than the Afghans and much better equipped than Afghans and lost pretty badly at much greater cost than the United States ever has given Afghanistan. And they had no rules of engagement. In fact, they were proud of it. And they were incredibly wanted to be torturing civilians. And there were no rules of engagement. And so even if you have since they lost to a force that by any measure was far inferior. And so I think to some extent it's a bit of a misdirection to lay defeat or difficult to fight it. If it's the thing that's standing between you and many is just rules of engagement, you're missing in some way, shape, or form when it comes to training your flipping or strategy. And that's where I would politely disagree with part of what you just said, which is I think what's missing in the current conflict is a goal. Why are you there? In-game is simply in-game is a sexy way of saying, well, what is a goal? The in-game is when you accomplish your goal.
And we don't have that. And that is so dumb that we don't have that. And that is not possible. Our national objective when we engage conflict of this nature is not typically a secret. The reason that the way that we tend to affect that outcome is the sources and methods that we would use is that the American public
definitely has a valid reason, wants to know why you're there. And absolutely, Congress exercising its legal oversight functions absolutely has a right and indeed to know why we're there. That has not been communicated. I think that's the primary reason. Then, in my view, we are not going to accomplish the objectives to have it be happen.
I think that's right. So, in fairness to your point, I think, should the president say tomorrow if I saw Card Island? No, right? That is a strategy decision that probably should remain falsified. But I see the issue as well, which is we are paying for this. You just asked us for $100 billion more dollars, right? And somebody should know what the goal is. And there should be some authorization. So we said that they had to declare war. So there has a congressional authorizations.
That's relatively congressional person's histories.
And everything's approved for number 9/11. And even after the Bush administration, Bush administration went to Congress to get authorization. But you need to 14 days of wrapped saying like act on this authorization. And so that I think is troubling. What's missing here is how quickly we've thrown away. It's not an orange. It's constitutional requirements, and it's ranked past several decades.
And Bush went to Congress and got the money. He got the legal authorization to use force, and the Congress appropriated the money and said, "Go do it."
Yeah.
Anybody else? Just ma'am.
Started a little bit.
Because we have been told, essentially, and I remember when this happened, when the embassy in Tehran was stormed and taken, and we had 40-some-odd Americans be held for 444 days. Iran essentially declared war upon us with that action. And we have essentially, by virtue of acts that they have performed since then to kill Americans, been at war with them. We don't have the declaration. I couldn't agree more. Maybe we should, because of the actions that they have taken. But that has been put forth as a reason, as a goal to basically put a stop to this, put a stop to Iran's as a state sponsor of terrorism, worst state sponsor of terrorism on the planet.
No doubt. I mean, this is a formidable enemy, and I am extremely concerned about the homeland right now, given what's happening to national security apparatus and the current leadership. So all the more reason that you could go to Congress in these past few decades. I think if they do that, Canada, you could certainly do it now. And, I think that would at least give the people a more informed perspective and his ability to change the course and be out like direction that's going.
Do you keep this Congress as it currently stands with a lot of partisan Democrats being subject to what they call the choke derangement syndrome? Do you think that would be forthcoming? Do you think that approval would happen?
Yeah, I think that they probably have a majority. Yeah, really? You think with the Democrats and cool?
That if they were, but they say, would you everything they could possibly do to stall and to get in the way of it.
And the Constitution would say you will not, right? That is the answer.
Exactly. That in the meantime, we're stuck with their bad decisioning.
Well, the value shows Iraq was the imminent threat that they were very dotted things up.
That, well, again, there may be evidence that has been disclosed, yes.
Well, you open a warrant has.
Okay. You guys can carry this discussion on further. I might even join you. Thank you all for coming. This has been a great, Margaret, fascinating. This was fascinating. I really enjoyed it. Thank you all for coming. Let's go out and see if we can't fix our politics. We have to have politics. Let's see if we can't make it work and work for our country. I'll leave it at that.